your ID lights in the middle, and your clearance lights on the outside. Make sure they're properly mounted, they're not cracked or broken, that the color is amber in the front and red in the back. You're going to check your windshield, make sure it's properly mounted, it's not cracked or broken, that it's clean and clear of any debris or illegal stickers. That the weather stripping around the windshield is intact, it's not cracked or broken. The wiper arms, make sure they're properly mounted, that they're not cracked or broken. Check your grill. Make sure your grill is properly mounted, no missing nuts or bolts. It's not cracked or broken, and that's clear of any debris. You check your high and low beam headlights and your left and right and four-way turn signals. It should be amber. Make sure everything's properly mounted, not cracked or broken, in good working condition. You check your front bumper. Make sure it's properly mounted, no missing nuts or bolts, no illegal welds. You check your license plate. Make sure that's properly mounted, no missing nuts or bolts. Your tags should be up to date, and the license plate should be clean and visible. And check under the vehicle for any fresh fluid leaks. Now, you can proceed to the other side.
Hey man, I'm trying to record here.
Alright, over here we can start off with coolant reservoir. Make sure that's properly mounted, not cracked, broken, or leaking. No missing nuts or bolts. That it's securely capped. The fluid levels within operating range. And your hoses should be properly clamped, not cracked or leaking. You're going to check your windshield washer reservoir, which should be in this location. Make sure it's properly mounted, no missing nuts or bolts, not cracked or leaking. Make sure it's securely capped. The fluid levels within operating range. And the hoses are securely clamped, not cracked or leaking. Move on to the alternator. Make sure that's properly mounted, no missing nuts or bolts. The wires, make sure you don't have any exposed wires or loose wires. Move on to my engine oil dipstick and my engine oil reservoir. Make sure they're both properly mounted, not cracked, spent, or leaking. They're both securely capped, and the oil levels within operating range. Check your 3 belts, which are your power steering belt, your water pump belt, and your alternator belt. Make sure they're properly mounted, not cracked, frayed, or broken. Make sure that they have no more than 3/4 inch of play or slack. Check your radiator fan. Make sure that's properly mounted, no missing blades, not cracked or broken. That it's not touching anything or it has any debris in between the radiator itself and the fan. You check your radiator now. Make sure that's properly mounted, no missing nuts or bolts. Make sure it's not cracked or leaking. The hoses, make sure they're properly clamped, not cracked or leaking. And that finishes off this side. One to this. Right here we finish off the engine compartment with the gear-driven air compressor and the air governor. Make sure they're properly mounted, no missing nuts or bolts. The hoses are securely clamped, they're not cracked or leaking. You got your power steering reservoir and dipstick. Make sure they're properly mounted, no missing nuts or bolts. That the reservoir itself is not cracked or leaking. Securely capped, fluid levels within operating range. Hoses securely clamped, not cracked or leaking. And then I'll finish it off with all my other engine hoses to make sure they're properly clamped, not cracked or leaking. Move on to the steering column. You got your steering wheel shaft here. Make sure that's properly mounted, not cracked, bent, broken, or illegally welded. Your couplings or U-joints. Make sure they're properly mounted, not cracked or broken. You got your steering gearbox. Make sure that's properly mounted, no missing nuts or bolts. The hoses to it. Make sure they're securely clamped, not cracked or broken. You got your fitment arm right here. Make sure that's properly mounted, no missing nuts or bolts, not cracked or broken. Cotter pin. Make sure that's intact. Drag link. Make sure that's properly mounted, not cracked, bent, or broken, or illegally welded. You got another cotter pin over here. Make sure that's intact. You got your 2 steering arms, your left right here and your right on the other side. Make sure they're properly mounted, not cracked or broken. You got your steering ring knuckle right here. Make sure that's properly mounted, not cracked, bent, or broken, missing any nuts or bolts. And your spindle in there as well. Make sure it's properly mounted, not cracked or broken. And then you finish off the steering linkage with your tie rod back here. Make sure that's properly mounted, not cracked, bent, or broken, or illegally welded. missing nuts or bolts. Now we move on to the front suspension, which starts off with your frame. Make sure your frame's not cracked, bent, or broken, or illegally welded, or has any illegal holes. Move on to your spring mount. Make sure they're properly mounted, not cracked or broken. Leaf springs, make sure those are properly mounted. Make sure that there's no more than a quarter of damage or 25%, or else it'll put the vehicle out of service. Your U-bolts, make sure those are properly mounted, not cracked or broken. No missing any nuts or bolts. And then move on to your axle. Make sure your axle is properly mounted, not cracked or broken, or illegally welded. Check your shock absorber. Make sure that's properly mounted, no missing nuts or bolts. It's not cracked, bent, or leaking. That finishes off your front suspension. Now we move on to your braking system, which consists of your brake hose. Make sure that's securely clamped, not cracked or leaking. Your brake chamber, air in the front, spring loaded in the back. Make sure that's properly mounted, no missing nuts or bolts, not cracked or leaking. Your push rod, make sure it's not cracked, bent, or broken. This should have no more than 1 inch of travel in the front, 2 inches of travel in the back. Your slack adjuster, make sure that's properly mounted, no missing nuts or bolts, or cracked or broken, and the cotter pin in there is intact. And then you move on to your brake drum over here. Make sure it's not cracked, bent, or broken. That the brake drum itself is no thinner than 5/8. Your brake shoes, make sure that they're not cracked, bent, or broken. That they're no thinner than 1/4 inch. And you're going to check for any excessive dust or any type of fluid in there. Now we move on to the tire. Make sure it's evenly worn, that both the front tires are the same size. The tread depth on here could be no less than 4 30-seconds in the front, 2 30-seconds in the back. The air pressure should be 100 to 110 psi, or depending on the manufacturer spec. You're going to check the sidewalls of your tire. Check for any bubbles, gouges, flashes, or tears. And then move on to the... Oh, and these can't be recapped. Sorry. The back one's good, these can't. You're going to move on to your rim. Make sure that's properly mounted, not cracked, bent, or broken. Your lug nuts. Make sure they're properly mounted, no missing nuts. That there's no excessive rust or any shiny threads. And move on to your hub oil seal. Make sure that's properly mounted, no missing nuts or bolts. It's not cracked or leaking. And finish it off with your air stem valve. Make sure that's properly mounted, not cracked or leaking, and securely and properly capped.
Thank you.